Welcome to another edition of Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President Local 237 Teamsters. With us once again is the Brooklyn District Attorney, Eric Gonzalez. Eric made history in 2017 when he became the first Latino elected to the district attorney in the state of New York. Beginning in 1995 as an assistant district attorney in the Sex Crimes and Special Victims Unit Bureau, following DA Thompson's untimely and tragic death in 2016, DA Gonzalez was appointed by the Governor Andrew Cuomo as acting district attorney following his own election in 2017, groundbreaking initiative known as Justice 2020. Justice 2020 consists of a 17-point action plan. This blueprint is transforming the work of DA Gonzalez's office by shifting toward preventative and accountability solutions based in communities and away from over-reliance on criminal convictions and incarceration. DA Gonzalez grew up in East New York and the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. He got his Juris Doctorate from the University of Michigan Law School, where he was the president of the Latino Law Association. Welcome back to Reaching Out.
Hey, Greg, it's great to be back. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you for coming back. Now, we really want to discuss Rikers Island with you. Okay. We know you visited Rikers Island. We know that you like to be hands-on. So we want to know, what is your impression of Rikers Island?
Yeah, it was important for me to visit, Greg. And, as a prosecutor, my office often makes recommendations to judges to send people to Rikers Island on either pretrial detention or after they've committed a crime and been found guilty. And I just thought, considering, all of the concerns everyone was hearing from Rikers Island, I needed to put my eyes on the situation. I've been there many times before. I've been to upstate jails, and quite honestly, they're always tough to visit. It's always tough to see men, primarily men, but men and women behind bars in cages, and in particular in our city. That is extra tough, I think, because of the racial disparities we see when we visit jail. When we go to Rikers Island, the overwhelming majority of people are Black and brown men. And you see it. You also see the influence and the consequences of poverty when you're on the island. And so it's unmistakable that a visit to Rikers Island is always difficult. It was worse this time than ever before, in part because of COVID, in part because of staffing issues on the island. But I witnessed, men in bullpen type cells with, excess of 20, 30 people in a cell, no beds, and many of them were telling us, and I was there with our great Attorney General, Tish James, and Bronx DA Darcel Clark. And our folks are telling us that they've been there. We were there on a Tuesday. They had been in holding cells since Thursday, waiting to be processed. Some had been on buses. Sanitation issues were terrible. And the COVID way we were screening people for COVID and holding them in quarantine together, was not one that, made me feel comfortable. Even me as a visitor on the island, just very concerned about catching COVID while I was there. And so it was a tough visit this time. I had been there before COVID under better circumstances with the Bard Prison Initiative, and we were there with Columbia University and helping some of the folks get through some of the, earning a college degree. There are some things that happen on Rikers Island that we can be proud of, but this last visit was the worst of the worst.
Now, let me ask you, why is the overcrowding issue coming up all of a sudden? What has changed?
I mean, there's the reality of when I was DA, when I first became DA, I guess when Ken Thompson was the district attorney and I was his chief ADA. And right when he passed away, there were over 10,000 people on the island. And today, they're under 6,000. So we've seen, a nearly 50% reduction, if not a 50% reduction in the last 5-6 years in terms of the population on the island. I think we need to tell the public that that decarceration policies that the police and the DAs have pursued and defenders and all the people concerned with, the jail population has been successful in reducing the population. But what happened during the heart of COVID, like in March and April of 2020, and over the summers, when COVID was really spreading throughout New York City, when we were really getting hit, our correctional facilities were getting hit harder than that. And so there were emergency measures taken, and my office agreed to the release of 300 people. The mayor's office did his own thing and released a bunch of people, and other DAs did the same. So we really got the population, some people say under 4,000. And so they're looking at it and saying, well, the population was about 4,000. I think the population was really closer to 4,500, but some people say it had dropped down to 4,000. And now it's, more recently it had been up to like 6,000. And so they're looking at it as an increase, right? It's an increase from 4,000 or 4,500 to 6,000. And as the jails continue to close on Rikers, as they close facilities, there are less and less places to put people. And so there is a sense of overcrowding now. I mean, the facts are that, the remaining open jails are more crowded than they need to be. And with COVID, and I think this is a real important piece, the social distancing and the other kind of sanitation necessary to keep everyone safe, including our corrections officers, is not present. When I was on the island, there was very little available soap that I could see, but I tell you what, the detainees were not wearing masks. And so even in the quarantine areas, detainees weren't wearing masks. And one of the visitors asked one of the correction officer tour guides, what are you doing about that? And he said, we can't do anything about that. We're not going to use force to require people to use masks. And so there's really the sense that COVID can spread pretty easily while you're detained.
So it's something that is funny that you mentioned. It's not really funny, but you mentioned the staff in Rikers Island. On September 23rd, we had one of our maintenance workers. We represent the maintenance workers on Rikers Island. He was robbed at, I would say, shift knife point. The shiv is something, a homemade weapon, and his watch was taken from him. And it happened at the oldest Banham correctional facility, and it happened at 3:45 p.m. He was surrounded by a number of inmates, and they stole his watch from him.
Unacceptable, Greg, and very consistent with what I'm hearing as district attorney about the levels of violence and the inability to keep folks safe. I think we do hear from the press, and we do see the number of corrections officers who were assaulted. I know that if you pay attention to it, it's seemingly every other week you're seeing about a correction officer who's really badly beaten on the island. But the detained population as well, these people are also victimized by gangs and very dangerous criminals. I spoke to the commissioner about violence on the island, and he told me, it's a handful of people, really. It's like 1% of the population that's doing a lot of this damage, but there's nothing that can happen to these folks. They can't really do much to them. So one of the things that I've tried to do as DA is get a list of who are the worst offenders on Rikers Island that come from Brooklyn. And I've asked my judges to fast track their cases, right? Because we can't get them off the island until their case is resolved. I'm not going to just release them into the general population if they can't even comport themselves and keep people without endangering people in Rikers. I'm not going to send them out into the community. So the best thing that I can do is be very deliberate in handling their cases. So we have a small list of cases, about 12 people that are from Brooklyn, that we've asked our courts to try to prioritize in getting their cases to hearing or trial or to resolution.
That's interesting. And some of them you expect, not all of them, may be sent upstate.
Well, we expect that they're in, that we believe we have compelling cases of guilt against them. If I didn't, I wouldn't ask the courts to hold them, and I expect that they'll be found guilty and sent upstate, where they're where there's more ability to separate them. One of the problems we have on Rikers Island is the New York City gang culture is very strong on the island. And so when our corrections officers are asked to take action against any particular detainee, for whatever reason, they can often be met with mass resistance from other people in that cell block who are from that same gang or share that same affiliation. So it's not safe for the corrections officers, and it's not safe for a lot of our detainees who are there because they've committed a crime, but they're not violent people. And so very much focused on trying to make sure that we can run a jail system in New York City where people can be held accountable for their bad acts, but they're not going to be brutalized inside the jails. And so we have a lot of challenges on the island right now, Greg.
Okay. Now, what are some of the gangs that you know that are on Rikers Island?
Well, there are a lot of gangs. I mean, there are all the gangs we've all heard of, Bloods and Crips and Latin Kings and, a number of other Latin gangs. But there's a lot of street crews. And these street crews really have very fierce loyalty, kids from the same housing development or from the same block. And, they actually get in Rikers, and shockingly enough, they will continue to get in trouble in their cell blocks and in their housing units until they can get to the housing unit where their friends are. So they'll continue getting in trouble, and the system transfers them to one place to another. And ultimately, we have this sort of obscene situation where all of the folks that belong to a particularized gang or crew are all connected to each other in that housing unit. And that's really when it becomes dangerous for everyone else involved.
Got it. So what do you think can be done with Rikers Island? What's the solution here?
I mean, there's a lot of solutions. There's a lot of solutions. We have to deal as a city, and this is not about pointing fingers at anyone because that's less than helpful. There's a lot of blame to go around, but we have to get the staffing levels up. We have to get, there is an absenteeism problem with some of the COs. We have to deal with that. We have to make sure they have the staffing issues resolved, that they feel supported by the mayor and the other people of importance in the city, that the COs feel left out and abandoned. And when I went to the island, I spoke to them and heard about the trauma and the dangers they face in their jobs. And Greg, let's be clear, this is a law enforcement group that's primarily people of color. I was, surprised by the number of women that are now COs. Because when I first started 25, 26 years ago, the prison guards were mostly men. But today in Rikers Island, we have a lot of women. I would estimate, 40, 45%, and a large percentage of people of color. And you sometimes wonder, Greg, and I'm not saying that race is involved in everything, but you sometimes wonder, would they allow the conditions to have gotten so bad for the workforce if this wasn't, people who come from Black and brown families, and that they would treat the COs with more regard and more respect. But we, that's part of the solution, is to support the people who are helping to protect the city. We need more programming to prevent, anti-violence initiatives on the prison. We need, restoration of services that were cut out because of COVID. And we need to get some of the more dangerous people off the island. Decarceration, reducing the overpopulation, is part of that solution. We created the overpopulation by closing down all the cells, but that's where we're at. And so we also have to get some people off the island. And I commend, the efforts that, different stakeholders, including the governor, has done to help reduce the population, whether it's, getting 40 people off a day. I think there's a new initiative to get women out of the prison areas. But, there's been a lot of thinking about how to reduce the population so we can have better staffing ratios. It's key at this point, especially with COVID, that we reduce the number of people there.
You're listening to Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President, Local 237 Teamsters. Our very special guest is Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez. You supported the Less is More Act that Governor Hochul signed a few weeks ago?
Absolutely. I was an earliest supporter of it when it first came out. The concept there is to sort of restore our parole system to what it was meant to be when parole was created. When parole was created back in the day, it was meant to help transition people who were coming out of state prison back to life in society, and to make sure that we could reduce recidivism and restore them and get them back into a place where they could make contributions and rejoin their families. And the criminal justice system, year after year, in order to impose more and more restrictions and to really kind of act more and more tough, added parole almost to every case. So virtually every single person was given a parole thing when they got out of prison, post-release supervision, even on nonviolent cases, even on white collar cases, and things that did not present a public safety challenge to our communities. We need to get back to the place that the people who are on parole for a reason. They're on there because they present a public safety risk that needs to be mitigated and supervised by trained parole professionals. Today, we have way too many people on supervision, the result of which is we are less safe because the parole officers cannot adequately supervise everyone. And so you have what less is more is really about: people who are getting violated on technical issues because the supervision is just so broad. And so I see people who get violated for all kinds of reasons, but they're not getting arrested because they created a new crime. They're not getting arrested because they're endangering anyone. And it's not good for public safety, and it's not good for our wallets either. But what I mean by that very specifically is, and I'm sorry if you hear some noise in the background, but what I mean about that is when someone is out in society, they've come back and they've paid their dues, and now they're getting reestablished in the community, and they get a job, or they rejoin with their family, or they're raising their children, and we violate them and send them back to Rikers Island because of a minor technical violation. We're helping to make sure that they're not successful. We need our parole officers to take decisive and quick action on people who are committing crimes and being unsafe. Less is more is about changing that. 65%, and this is a remarkable number, 65% of the people who are being returned to our jails or our prisons on these violations of parole are not because they've been rearrested. It's because they were late to a meeting. Maybe they drove without permission. They tested positive for marijuana, even though marijuana is legal now. The parole officer can still tell you you can't smoke. So if you test positive for marijuana, it's a violation. And so we just need a better way. We need a better way of thinking about our justice systems. We need to reduce incarceration, and we need to reduce the number of people in jail so that the people who are there for a reason, and that reason is our safety.
Now, you announced last week the indictment of contractors who allegedly bribed NYCHA superintendents. And I know we represent a lot of employees in NYCHA, including the superintendents. Can you tell us what you can tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'll talk in some general terms. And of course, everyone is presumed innocent until.
Yeah, that's why I said alleged, and that's
Right.
why I said, tell us what you can tell us.
Presumption of innocence, until a jury or a judge finds otherwise. But Department of Investigations does a lot of training with city employees about their obligations around corruption. And I think it's important to say here to your members, if someone tries to bribe a public employee, it's not sufficient that the employee just says no. The job requires that they actually report it. And so you can report it to Department of Investigation. Usually there's an inspector general that's in charge of a particular area. But we had some really actually something to be proud about, Greg. We had some superintendents who had been attempted to be bribed, and they did exactly what they were supposed to do under the law and what's appropriate morally and otherwise. They reported that the person tried to bribe them. So the DOI had some ideas of who was trying to do the bribing, and in other locations, they set up undercover people to serve as superintendents in some housing developments, including, 2 in Brooklyn. There was in other places. And those same bad actors who were these outside vendors, contractors, tried to bribe them, and they were in some cases caught on videotape, and there was evidence, overwhelming evidence, I say, of their guilt. But it's because we did have some good superintendents who came forward and did their job, and I salute them, that we were able to catch this. We also realized that the process by which NYCHA does some of this micro purchasing and micro contracting is so ripe for abuse and corruption, because these superintendents can give out jobs to local contractors, and it can be as much as $10,000, and they don't need anyone else's approval. So if you're the superintendent, you can give out jobs, and so you don't need bids. You can just say how much for this job, and you can approve the amount, and you can pay it. And so we've seen some inflation of what a job should cost. If you're fixing up the inside of an apartment, it's worth $3,000-$4,000, and you're charging $8,000 or $9,000. You're going to get an overpayment. And what we saw was typical kickbacks to the superintendent for giving the job, and roughly 10% of whatever the contractor got paid. So there's a problem there. We want to make sure that our NYCHA residents get the services they need, and they don't have to have an overly complicated approval mechanism. But with this ability for supers to just pick and choose who they want to do the work, it's an issue that can lead to corruption. It's a great case, however, and without saying more, I expect to see some additional arrests in the case.
Yeah, I heard your conversation, and I could hear in there where that would be the case. I was never in favor of the system that they set up. I mean, on one hand, it was a fast track. On the other hand, I saw where it was leading, and you never want to do that in government. You never want to put people in that position.
Yeah, I was going to say, and these outside vendors are bold, right? Because we were able to hear some of the conversations, and they straight up test the supers. Like, they test them, and they offer them small perks and privileges, and then ultimately it comes down to a money bribe. And at least in one occasion, we allege that the work was never even done, that they just, the guy, was paid and never actually completed the work. And so it was outright, a theft.
Sure.
And those are taxpayer dollars.
Theft of service.
And it hurts the people in NYCHA.
Sure it does. They paid for a service, they didn't get it, and it further corrupts the system that in this case serve the need of the people that are living there.
Yeah.
That's just about all the time we have for this segment of Reaching Out. The time went fast. I hope, well, we didn't have all our questions. I hope you'll come back in the near future. Anytime you want to come back, you have an open invitation.
I will, Greg, and please, brother, stay safe, and know that I appreciate the work you do on behalf of the city residents of Brooklyn, but also the entire city.
Thank you. That's all the time we have.
Bye, everyone.
That's all the time we have for this segment of Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd. Very special guest was District Attorney of Brooklyn, Eric Gonzalez. Thank you for coming on.